Today, we're really lucky to have an expert regarding tufted puffins. Katherine Luscher is the Tufted Puffin Conservation Coordinator for the National Audubon Society's Seabird Institute. Though the Institute is based in Maine, she is their only full-time staff member here on the West Coast. So you got quite the region. Okay. Her position was created in 2023, specifically to provide more coordination and support for tufted puffin conservation in their southern range. In this capacity, she engages directly with researchers, agencies, and nonprofits, working collaboratively to stop the decline of our amazing seabird. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Oregon, go Ducks, go Puffins, and a Master of Environmental Policy from Western Washington University. But believes her most important education has come from simply unplugging from technology and spending time in the outdoors. Please welcome Katherine. Nap a little bit after that. What? Let's see. One moment, please. There are too many screens up right now. Okay, here we go. All right, thank you so much. As you just heard, my name is Katherine Luscher, and I am the Tufted Puffin Conservation Coordinator for National Audubon Seabird Institute, which is an absolutely amazing position. And I am so blessed to be able to join Audubon in this role. And I'm very grateful to Lori and to Seed for inviting me here today to talk to you about tufted puffins, and more specifically, tufted puffins in their southern range. But first, a quick disclaimer, I am not a biologist, but I do work closely with the researchers that are working on tufted puffin conservation. My background is more specifically geared towards program management and community outreach and engagement. So I bring that to the table. I also am a whitewater rafting guide on the Rogue River, where I have worked for the last 25 years, which if nothing else means I can say things loudly and with great confidence. So I have that going for me as well. Also related to rivers, it explains why my spark bird, the bird that really got me interested in birds at large and kind of forced me to slow down a little bit and pay attention, is actually the American dipper. I prefer ouzel as the name. It's very much understated as compared to a tufted puffin, but an absolutely amazing bird once you learn a little bit more about it. I am going to begin my talk today with a very brief tufted puffin 101 and provide a high-level overview of their life cycle. And then I'd like to share some of the work that we're actually doing in Oregon and Washington to help conserve this amazing seabird. And since I know some of you were here last year, and since the life cycle hasn't changed that much over the last 12 months, I've actually inserted throughout my conversation a few trivia questions and that I will be asking, and the first person that correctly answers will win one of our new hot off the press tufted puffin stickers from the Seabird Institute. Again, Seabird Institute, which is based in Maine, is very heavily focused towards Atlantic puffins, but I am slowly getting some material that has tufted puffins on them. Okay, here we go. Tufted Puffin 101. Tufted puffins are the largest of the puffin species, the other ones being the horned puffin, the Atlantic puffin, and the misnamed rhinoceros auk, which often gets forgotten. The rhinoceros auk was actually misclassified as a member of the auklet tribe of alcids, but recent genetic studies have actually shown that the rhinoceros auk is not only a puffin, but the other three puffin species evolved from the rhinoceros auk, making the rhinoceros auk the original puffin. And in fact, it does sometimes go by the name unicorn puffin, which actually might benefit its marketing a little bit. Tufted puffins, horned puffins, and rhinoceros auks are all found here on the West Coast. However, for some reason, and I'm working on this, it's the Atlantic puffin that we will usually see in our gift shops. In fact, I was just at your local brewery and they have a Pacific puffin porter, but the puffin is an Atlantic puffin. I caught them. Thrilled to learn that. Tufted puffins are about 16 inches tall and weigh about 1¼ pounds. They are pelagic seabirds, meaning they come to land only to breed. Only to breed. So they live about 8 months of the year on the open water. They can live an average of about 20 years, so birds up to 30 years is not unusual to hear of. They can fly up to 55 miles an hour, and they can dive over 250 feet into the water to catch their prey. So these are incredibly athletic birds. And in fact, their football-shaped body is much better suited for swimming than it is for flying. So much so that in the 17th century, the Catholic Church deemed them to be more fish than bird and could be eaten during Lent. And again, not a biologist, I can confirm that they are a bird. Very much a bird. In Oregon, many of you may know this, but in Oregon, all 1,800 plus of our coastal rocks, reefs, and islands are protected under the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge Complex, which was established in 1935 to protect not only breeding seabirds, but also marine mammals. This entire area is protected by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're very fortunate to have that level of protection here in Oregon.
So what are they protected from? You and me.
Yeah,
I mean, like, what would people do?
activity,
People
you'd
would
be
go
amazed
walk
what
on the-
humans would do.
They go and walk on the rocks and stuff.
And I will talk a little bit about it coming up. Yes. But why am I telling you this? Why do we care about these rocks and islands? It is because it is on these rocks and islands off of our coast that our tufted puffins return each year to breed, usually arriving in early April. As a greeting ritual and during courtship, you may often see puffins rubbing their beaks together. And this is an activity called billing. This behavior is not unique to puffins. In fact, cedar waxwings, pigeons, doves, even albatross are known to engage in billing. Also, fun fact, puffin bills and their tufts possess fluorescent pigments that glow under a UV light and likely aids in their mate selection. I think this is really cool. So how does it work? It turns out that puffins have 4 types of cone cells in their retina, as opposed to the 3 cone cells that humans have. And this additional cell gives them what is called tetrachromatic vision, a really fun word to say, but it enables them to perceive UV light and see the vibrant fluorescent patterns on both the bill and the tufts that us with our mere 3 cones cannot detect. Once a breeding pair is formed, we get to our first trivia question. How do puffins build their nests?
The burrows.
Excellent, everyone gets a sticker later. More excitement with the answers. Puffins are burrow nesting seabirds, digging their temporary homes using their sharp claws and their strong beaks, though sometimes they will rest in rocky crevices. If a puffin returns to the same burrow year after year, which is actually quite common, it may only take them a few days to refurbish the nest. However, if they need to dig a new burrow, it could take up to 2 weeks. The burrows are usually about 2 to 3 feet deep, but they can be up to 7 feet deep. And they often have a slight bend, and the thought is that provides protection for both the eggs and the chick once the egg hatches. Once the burrow is dug, the decorating begins. Both the males and females work together to line the burrow with soft materials like seaweed and feathers, maybe grasses. And they both work to maintain the nest throughout the breeding season, which is believed to help with their pair bonding, which is extremely important for a species that is thought to mate for life. The female puffin will lay only one egg per season. She only lays one egg, but this is an egg that weighs up to 14% of her body weight. 14% of her body weight. That would be equivalent to a 150-pound woman giving birth to a 21-pound baby, which may explain why they only lay one egg. But for a 1.5-pound puffin, that egg weighs about a quarter pound. Once that egg is laid, the female and the male continue working together and take turns keeping the egg warm during the 45-day incubation period, up until the chick hatches. Next question.
Well, this is a fun room.
Baby puffin chicks are called pufflings.
Yeah.
Just when you thought they can't get intruders, they do. And they're actually born with their eyes open, which is fairly uncommon among bird species, but having their eyes open from birth is an adaptation that helps the chicks survive in the darkness of the burrow and also to recognize their parents for feeding from day one. The chick will remain in the burrow while the parents go out and deliver the food directly to them. And this goes on for the first 6 to 7 weeks of the puffin's life. So yes, the parents dig the burrow together. They do the housekeeping together. They incubate the egg together, and they take turns feeding that puffling together. But before you go giving them the Parents of the Year award, know this. Once that chick grows stronger, the parents usually will go out, bring some fish back, leave it in a nice little pile in that burrow, and bail. They will leave for the open seas while their chick remains in the burrow until one night, probably guided by the light of the full moon, perhaps also because it's become hungry, that little chick will jump into the water and begin its solitary journey out to sea. The fledgling must learn to fly, to swim, and to hunt without any further assistance from its parents. It is just doing what nature is telling it to do. This transition to independence, some say tough love, I say tufted love, is a critical and challenging time in the tufted puffin's life.
When they survive, percentage?
I don't know percentages, that's a good question. I will say that most of the young will then spend about 3 to 4 years out at sea before a strong instinct encourages them to return back to their natal breeding grounds and hopefully find a mate and start the cycle all over again. Okay, a 3-part trivia question. What is a group of puffins on water called?
Pufferama.
It should be. It's called a raft. A group of puffins on land is called. Oh, you guys are quiet now. There's actually 4 answers. There's probably more. I've heard it called a circus, a colony, a puffinry, and an improbability. Which, given this morning, is probably the right term. And what is a group of puffins in the air called? A whirl. Whirl, which I really like. So what happens to the, yes,
Did you mention about how old the babies are when mom and dad take off?
they're usually about 6 to 7 weeks.
6, 7 weeks, okay.
So those adult puffins, they've left their chicks, they've gone out to see what happens to them. After the adult puffins abandon their chick, the male and female usually are thought to go actually their separate ways. They are not believed to spend the winter months together, which might be one of the reasons that they're able to mate for life. But both will undergo an annual molt in which all of their wing feathers are replaced. They will also shed their bill plate or bill covering, and they will lose their tufts and their bright white face. And this is an adaptation that is believed to help them survive on the sea for the 8 months when they're out there. They blend in much better without all their breeding flair. Amazingly, as this happens, I think this is amazing, said that they're unable to hunt or fly for a few weeks. They are just on the open seas, completely vulnerable. The adult puffins will start to grow back their iconic tufts, usually in late December, and then by the time we see them, they are fully tufted with their bright orange iconic bill, their white face, and the orange eyeliner. They are just beautiful birds.
How far out to sea do they spend the winter months?
I'm gonna put a pin in
Okay,
that.
okay.
But it's an excellent question.
Okay.
The question was, how far do they go out? But I am getting to that.
Okay.
And then if you want to see tufted puffins, which hopefully you either have or will soon here at Face Rock, I actually went out yesterday with Carol and saw 2 tufted puffins out there. So it's just so great to see them. The best time is usually mid-June to late July, usually before 10 a.m. And that tends to be when the parents are out foraging, and so they're a little bit more active. You can see them at other times, but most reliably, morning hours tend to be best. And now for a question I never really thought about until I started working with seabirds. If all animals need fresh water to survive, and if a tufted puffin spends 8 months out on salt water and longer for the fledglings, what do they drink?
Saltwater.
Puffin aid.
I found this fascinating. So tufted puffins and other seabirds actually have salt glands located above their eyes. And in a sense, these glands act like a kidney, and they filter the excess salt from the blood and then excrete it via grooves along the bill. So they drink salt water, they just act as their own desal operation.
Wow.
In fact, if you ever happen to see gulls with a drop of liquid at the end of their beak, in many cases, that is the salt that they have expelled from drinking salt water and or eating your French fries. So we know what and how they drink when they're at sea for 8 months, but this gets to the question, who knows where do Oregon's tufted puffins go in the winter?
Gobble.
No. No, actually, I shouldn't say no because we don't actually know where they go. They have not yet been successfully tagged in Oregon, but if they travel a similar distance as other puffins that have been tracked, that means they're traveling about 120 miles from their breeding grounds. So they travel about 120 miles out into the sea. Well, I should say, except for this guy. This is fascinating. This guy, who refused to stop and ask for directions, ended up in Maine with the Atlantic puffin.
Wow.
Been there the last 2 seasons. I have not yet heard that he's been back this season. But this photo actually shows the size difference. This is on an island off the coast of Maine. It also shows the Atlantic puffin looking pretty confused. Like that. So although we don't know exactly where our tufted puffins spend the non-breeding season, we do know that more generally, with the exception of this guy, Their range extends from the Farallon Islands in Northern California up through Alaska, Russia, and Japan. Their largest colonies are in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, and they are believed to be relatively stable. But here in their southern range, from Northern California up to British Columbia, a range that is linked to the cold water current known as the California current, the population is experiencing a drastic decline from over 20,000 in the 1900s, which is not that long ago, to an estimated 2,000 birds about 6-7 years ago. So let's take a little bit closer look about what's happening in their southern range. In Washington, there has been nearly a 60% drop in the population over the last 25 years, with an average annual decline of about 8%. And if this trend is holding, which we believe it is currently, that means there are less than 800 birds at 19 colonies in Washington, with only 2 colonies remaining in the inland waters in the Salish Sea. And on that map, you can see it's Smith Island and Protection Island. And then in Oregon, we see similar trends. The most recent Oregon Coastwide Survey, which was done in 2021 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, estimates that we have 553 birds remaining. 553. It's interesting that it's odd. Yeah. But I'm gonna let that go. So our puffins remaining are spread along 17 active colonies, with the largest colony believed to be at 3 Arch Rocks, which is just offshore from Oceanside, and the second largest to be up in Cannon Beach at Haystack Rock. But interestingly, just south of us, in the Farallon Islands, we're seeing a very gradual increase in the tufted puffin population, with last year's having a record 650 birds. Why? We don't know. But I asked some researchers, they think it could be perhaps that area was not as affected by marine heat waves. Perhaps the fish are more readily available. And then the third reason they gave me was perhaps because the researchers on the island actually keep the bald eagles away, which is one of the primary predators. So there's a few reasons that they think that the tufted puffins in California, or at least on the Farallon Islands, I should say, not all of California, are doing reasonably okay. But I want to bring us back to Oregon, where I already noted Haystack Rock in Cannon Beach. But first, a quick question. You'll note I keep saying Haystack Rock in Cannon Beach. How many Haystack Rocks are in Oregon?
3.
3 gets partial credit because there are 3 along the coast. You have one here, there's one up in Pacific City, and then there is one in Cannon Beach. In fact, Pacific City is the tallest of the Haystack Rocks. But technically, if you want to be a hoot at your next cocktail party, you can let whoever will listen know that Oregon has 6 Haystack Rocks. But 3 are inland and lesser known. And they're located in the Wallowas near the Oahe River and then over near Klamath Lake.
Which one in Bandon is considered Haystack Rock?
The one that doesn't look like it is.
Devil's Kitchen.
I think the
And
one
it's
that's
the largest
largest
rock, yeah, but, yeah, Devil's Kitchen right there.
Okay, back to Haystack Rock, Cannon Beach, which I am going to highlight because Haystack Rock is one of the easiest places in the lower 48 to actually see tufted puffins. Its intertidal area, so below the high tide mark, is actually protected as one of the 7 marine gardens that we have in Oregon. And then above high tide, it's protected as a part of the national refuge that I already mentioned. At low tides, Haystack Rock in Cannon Beach is connected to the mainland, earning it the distinction as the largest onshore population of tufted puffins in the lower 48. So it's not only the easiest places to both view and monitor tufted puffins. We can gather a lot of data from studying this rock. It also, among other things, sometimes gets unexpected guests. Like this cougar that actually wandered onto the rock in 2023. And then had to swim back to shore at high tide. And we all know how much cats like water. The data collected at Haystack Rock over the last 5 decades or so show that the tufted puffins at Haystack Rock have decreased by over 75% over the last 50 or so years. With the 2024 estimates, which are the most recent estimates we currently have at 102 birds. That's 102 birds remaining up north. So we know that they're declining. I'd say that we know that they're drastically declining along Washington and Oregon's coast. And honestly, we're not yet specifically sure why this is happening. That was like when I first took this job, I was afraid to ask that question because it seemed so like everyone would have the answer. Nobody has this answer. We do not know why the tufted puffins are declining. That said, most signs point to one usual suspect. Climate change. Specifically, warmer ocean temperatures that are affecting the availability of prey, invasive plant species making it harder to burrow, invasive animal species that are destroying their habitat or preying on chicks and eggs, and then predators, and I mentioned the most common being the bald eagle, but mink and otter, river otter, are actually another common predator here. And I should mention one other factor, us, or at least humans and human-related actions, things like plastic pollution, but also people illegally flying drones during seabird breeding, climbing on rocks, and in the case up in Cannon Beach, shining laser pointers at the seabirds, all of which are illegal. And despite our best efforts with signage, continue to happen. So the big question, given that the overall population is declining here in their southern range, what's being done? What are we actually doing to help the tufted puffin? I actually know this answer. So I'm going to share a few highlights. But I'm first going to take a step back just to set the stage. In 2014, NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, filed a petition with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list the tufted puffin as endangered. However, the subsequent species status assessment deemed that a listing was not warranted, primarily because the population in Alaska appears to be fairly stable, and we have not yet been able to determine a genetic difference between the birds in the southern range and the ones further north. So while the tufted puffin does not have federal protection, they are listed as endangered by Washington state. They are a species of greatest conservation need here in Oregon, and they are a species of special concern down in California. So people are aware about the population decline. Because the species was not listed, in 2023, Friends of Haystack Rock, which I consider a sister organization to SEE, another group of wonderful people, worked together with Audubon Society to create my position. And one of the first things I did was to pull together a tufted puffin conservation working group. That was after I Googled tufted puffins. But my goal is to try to generate more communication, collaboration, and coordination for tufted puffin conservation in their southern range, with involvement from numerous agencies, researchers, and nonprofits. Resources are limited, and we're really trying to leverage the existing work to do more for this bird. I just mentioned that the tufted puffin is listed as endangered in Washington state. That means, among other things, that they are required to have a species recovery plan, and they do, with a goal of restoring a viable self-sustaining population as determined by 3 specific recovery objectives. And here in Oregon, though the tufted puffin is a priority species, we're not actually required to have a statewide conservation plan. But last year, using the Washington plan and others as inspiration, the Oregon subset of the working group actually got together and voluntarily drafted Oregon's first tufted puffin conservation action plan with an ambitious 10-year goal of halting the decline. And that's supported by 5 objectives that include research focused on really filling in all those data gaps I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, restoration and management, policy, education, engagement, and outreach, and then finally, the continued coordination and collaboration. And again, this is a 100% voluntary effort, but the newly updated state wildlife plan just mentioned the working group in their updated plan. So we are getting a little bit of footing in the world there. And rather than reading from you directly from both plans, which I know sounds amazing, what I'd like to do instead is share some of the few priority projects that are actually happening this summer. So I'll start with the Bill Lowe study. Oregon State University is going to continue to collect photos of adult puffins bringing food back to their chicks. And this is allowing us to better understand the diet of puffins at Haystack Rock and Cannon Beach. Thus far, I should say last season, we had seen images of, I need to look at this, Pacific herring, sardine, larval fish, salmon, squid, lamprey, and smelt have all been reported. Birds with Fish, as the project is called, is actually a community science project that is focused on all of Oregon's seabirds, and everyone was invited to participate. So if you enjoy photography, if you happen to be out here in Bandon collecting photos of seabirds, bringing back food, I have some information about how you can submit your photos to this project. So it's one way that all of you can get involved and help them better understand what is happening. And since we're talking about birds with fish, here's another fun fact. Adult puffins feed while they hunt. They are actually not known to bring food back to land unless they have a chick to feed. So if you see a bird with fish, or specifically a puffin with fish, it likely means that they do have a chick, which is kind of nice to know. Murres and guillemots are not, I was just gonna say, Murres and guillemots actually will bring fish back to land to feed for themselves, but puffins do not do that. So, and especially if you see a puffin going into a burrow with fish, that is probably the best sign we currently have that that is an active, successful burrow. This is also cool. The bill of a tufted puffin allows it to carry multiple fish at once. As you can maybe see from this photo, their upper jaw and their tongue have tiny spikes on it, which are called denticles. And that, along with a locking tongue, actually allows them to hold a fish in place while they continue to hunt for more. It's not unusual to see a puffin with, 8, 10 fish, but who knows how many fish, the most number of fish that have ever been seen in a puffin's bill.
48.
Higher.
Wow.
Higher than 38?
42.
62. All 62 are the most fish ever seen in a puffin. It was actually an Atlantic puffin, which is smaller than a tufted puffin. So we can do better. 62 fish, right? Seems crazy. It also makes the phrase "eat like a bird" somewhat questionable. But So in addition to birds with fish, volunteers are being trained to assist with tufted puffin monitoring at various places up and down the Oregon coast, including here in Bandon, thanks to Carol. Whoop, whoop. Y'all, if you want to see a tufted puffin, meet up with Carol. But the data that the volunteers are collecting is actually providing us with really valuable information regarding population estimates, breeding successes, and also disturbances, such as a bald eagle coming in for a snack. In this case, the eagle grabs a common murre, but its presence can cause what's known as a flush or a disturbance in which many of the seabirds will suddenly take flight, which can sometimes result in the abandonment of eggs and chicks, making them vulnerable to other predators. It's both awesome to see and also sad. We will also, thanks to a fabulous volunteer and his boat that is conveniently named the Tufted Puffin, continue to conduct some offshore monitoring at Tufted Puffin colonies that can't otherwise be easily assessed from land. This photo is actually of Three Arch Rocks up in Oceanside, and that flat rock is thought to be, that is Finley Rock, is thought to be the largest tufted puffin colony remaining here in Oregon, at least. Related to monitoring, if you were here last year, you heard me talk a little bit about this, but we started to use drones to help us better analyze tufted puffin habitat. Now, I'm going to pause here and acknowledge that the use of drones is understandably contentious, and it should be. It absolutely should be. And it's also illegal in many places up and down the Oregon coast, unless you have a special permit, usually from Oregon Parks and Recreation. Drones can not only disturb seabirds by creating unnecessary stress, especially during breeding season, when they often, I'm assuming, mimic a predator. They can also disturb our outdoor experiences. Who's been outdoors when a drone has been near? It's no bueno. It's not great. But that said, I do believe that drones are a tool that, if used properly and with the correct permitting and following best practices, can actually help us fill some of the data gaps that we are facing. And I will say this, that drones are probably far more economical, more environmental, and less intrusive than helicopter surveys that previously has been done. So we need to find that balance. We're working on that. Our drone work actually helped inform some of the new drone policies that are coming out from Oregon Parks and Rec. But drones for recreational use is very different than drones for scientific use. But we are very careful of when we fly and where we fly. And then earlier I had mentioned the destruction of habitat due to invasive species as one of the potential reasons why we are seeing a decline in tufted puffins. So I want to bring us up to Washington on Destruction Island, just appropriately named. This is an island that is just offshore from the Olympic Peninsula, where European rabbits were brought over by the lighthouse keeper in the 19th century. And the thought is that they were brought over as a pet. The grazing and burrowing activity of the rabbits is affecting not only the tufted puffins, but the rhinoceros hawks by creating massive erosion and burrows collapsing. So not surprisingly, if you know anything about bunnies, they have multiplied a lot. So the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife recently received mitigation funds from a 1999 unnamed oil spill. It's taken this long to get funds. But that oil spill is thought to have killed over 2,400 owls, primarily rhinoceros auks. But the funding is going to allow Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to hopefully eradicate the invasive species and create a more hospitable breeding ground for our native seabirds there. And then one final project that I'm really excited about that I want to highlight. This summer at two locations, Yaquina Headlands, just north of here in Newport, and Hunter's Island, just south of Gold Beach, which are both historic breeding grounds for tufted puffins. We plan to experiment with a conservation technique known as social attraction. This is really cool. Puffins are colonial seabirds, which has nothing to do with colonialism. But everything to do with the fact that they live in colonies, or rather they live in groups. Puffins are really social seabirds, and they recognize they recognize the presence of other seabirds as evidence of a suitable habitat. It's like being on a road trip. Back before we didn't all have mini computers in our pockets, we probably had a gazetteer in the trunk. Imagine stopping in a new town, one you've never stopped in before. If you were to see one lighted restaurant with a lot of happy customers and another looking somewhat uncared for and empty, many of you, no judging if not, but many of you are probably more likely to go where you see the people. Puffins do a similar thing. It's almost like a visual endorsement of that particular place. And it builds what is called, in puffins at least, social confidence. The use of social attraction for seabirds isn't new, specifically for puffins. Actually, puffins are the species in which social attraction was first used. By 1887, the population of Atlantic puffins off the coast of Maine were all but gone due to your next trivia question. What caused the decline of the Atlantic puffin?
Overfishing?
Not overfishing, no one said it. Hunting for both meat and fashion, which is a trend I'm hoping is not going to return. So what was done to bring the Atlantic puffins back to Maine? There was a young scientist named Steve Press, and he found an old journal that noted that Atlantic puffins once thrived on the islands off the coast of Maine. And he, young and full of hope, decided he was going to do something about it. So he got a permit to actually translocate 7 Atlantic puffin chicks when they were just a few days old to Maine from Newfoundland, which is actually where 95% of North America's breeding Atlantic puffins are. So he got these little chicks, he created artificial burrows for them on Eastern Egg Rock, which is an island just off the coast of Maine, what they call the mid-coast of Maine. And it is again an island where they historically did breed. And he fed them fish, just like their parents would. Maybe not exactly like their parents would, but he brought them fish. And it took 4 years after that first chick fledged for an adult to return. 4 years. And that tracks with how long we think that puffins actually stay at sea before they return back to their natal ground. And this was important because it confirmed that a chick will come back to where it fledged, not necessarily to where it hatched. And Steve, knowing that puffins are social creatures, wanted to encourage the returning bird and the others that followed to land, burrow, and mate. So he took a leap of faith and he installed decoys, mirror boxes, and audio recordings to create the illusion of a thriving Atlantic puffin colony. Over the next 13 years, more puffin chicks were translocated. It was 954 in total came to us from Newfoundland. And over time, the number of puffins returning and visiting the island slowly increased and eventually nested and resulted in the first restoration of a puffin colony anywhere in the world. Now remember, puffins had not colonized these islands for nearly a century. But today, 5 decades later, thanks to social attraction and other similar techniques, the National Audubon Society's Project Puffin, which is now called the Seabird Institute, has restored more than 1,500 puffin pairs to 3 islands off the coast of Maine. But even more exciting, the techniques developed during that initial social attraction project have actually helped restore more than 45 rare species at 120 locations worldwide. And this is a decoys. This one is newly made. They're hand painted out in Maine. It's pretty cool. And they're beautiful art too. I know that Carol's eyeing us. Just feel her burning. Okay, so back to Oregon and Tufted Puffins. The 2 projects I mentioned, the Aquina Headlands and Hunter's Island, will be the first social attraction projects for seabirds here in Oregon. We're going to install an array of about 18 puffins at Hunter's Island. We're actually hoping to do that next week if the swells cooperate with us. And at Yaquina, we'll have a much smaller display of about 8 tufted puffin decoys. And both projects are going to be monitored using remote cameras. So we'll be able to hopefully see 2 things. One, we want to see if there are tufted puffins in the area, if they actually slow down and stop to look at the decoys. And then the other is if they will interact with the decoys in any way. So pretty exciting. Yes.
Will those cameras be streamed so that the public can see what's going on?
I don't believe they will be live streamed. I need to check on that. I don't know. I don't think there's gonna be a lot of activity, so we'll certainly share if we see puffins interacting, that will definitely be shared. But I can look into that for you as well.
How do they choose the location that they?
So we chose Hunters because Hunters is a historic breeding ground. It was in 2021, there was a pair that was there. The habitat looks suitable. It is accessible by boat. I mean, there's not a marina there, but you can take a literal leap of faith and get onto that island. And there are not known predators.
Yes.
We were also looking at Goat Island, which is a little bit further south, but there are some known predators there, and we decided not to start at Goat Island.
Yeah.
Yaquina Headlands, I'm gonna say, is a little bit more of a demonstration project. Historically, it was actually a place that puffins did breed on the headlands. That has not happened for a while, but the rocks and islands off of Yaquina are historic breeding grounds. And over the last 2 summers, there have been tufted puffins flying over Yaquina Headlands, which is one of the reasons that we selected that. It's also visible to the public. And we actually want to use this more as a demonstration project to get the general public to understand a little bit more about the status of tufted puffins and some of the work that we are doing. So at Yaquina, in connection with the tufted puffin display, which will be, if you're familiar with that particular park, it's going to be up near the lighthouse. We're going to hopefully have some puffin feet painted on the ground so that people can take photos and send them to us if they actually see tufted puffins, real tufted puffins interacting with the decoys. I'm actually expecting to receive a lot of decoy photos.
Yeah.
But then in their interpretive center, we also are gonna have a tufted puffin display. So we're gonna have an educational display in that visitor center, which gets a lot of traffic. So it's a way for us really to get more information out about tufted puffins to the public. And I will say at the Yaquina Headlands, we're gonna have all logos on display from groups that are working together. So C will be represented up there as well. And, I think these look pretty realistic from a distance, but they have been tested. So these people are Eagle approved. We are actually, this is from a project that was up in Washington State. Oftentimes it's not uncommon just to put them in the ground straight up, but what we are doing a little bit more eagle prevention with our design, and we had a volunteer amazing volunteer that helped us create stands that are gonna be much harder for an eagle potentially to grab and fly away with. And then I just want to add a few more things that are happening, maybe not as exciting as social attraction, but the Tufted Puffin Conservation Working Group is also following the legislative session, or I should say it did follow the legislative session, and working to ensure that policies and funding sources are available for seabird conservation. And I can pretty much guarantee to all of you, thanks to the Oregon Coast Aquarium, that you soon will be seeing a lot more Tufted Puffins guaranteed. I mean, they're gonna be on a par. But Oregon's getting a new license plate. I'm not quite sure when they'll hit the streets. I know that they did reach the threshold to begin printing. So you'll start seeing the Tufted Puffin license plate, and those proceeds go to a new rehab center that the Oregon Coast Aquarium built that will help seabirds and marine mammals. And then I'm working with nonprofits to just better inform the public about our iconic seabird. I'm doing presentations, check. I'm writing articles and helping others write articles. In fact, the winter issue of Audubon magazine, for the first time ever, featured a Tufted Puffin, which we were pretty excited about. Oregon Field Guide has reached out to me. They're interested in doing another story on Tufted Puffins here in Oregon. So that is also really exciting. And then I'm exploring ways to do more outreach and education with schools. And that's just a little overview of the work being done. But I always get this question, what can I do? What can we do for Tufted Puffins? What can we do for a bird that breeds on federally managed land that's only here for a few months out of the year and that the population is decreasing? It's not an easy question to answer, but you can talk to decision makers to help us elevate the status of the Tufted Puffin and ensure our refuges remain intact and funded and staffed. That's a huge thing that we need to ensure continues to happen. And then there's bills like HB 4134, which was the 1.25% for wildlife. That will hopefully start generating some funds that will allow the Tufted Puffin Conservation Group to actually carry out some of the priorities we've identified. And I have to say that the Tufted Puffin is right to be the poster child for that funding because nobody hates the puffin. It is the most non-controversial species I have ever worked with. If we can show that funds are going to help the puffin, nobody in the public's gonna be upset by that. It's absolutely amazing working with puffins. You can also, as I mentioned, participate in community science. You can participate in the Birds with Fish, which is taking photos again of birds with fish. It's a really great name that they picked. Or if you go to your Point Headlands and you see a puffin interacting with those decoys, take a photo, send them to me. There'll be more information available up there about how to do that. You can support groups like SEED, which is an absolutely amazing nonprofit. And I know a lot of people often say that no amount is too small, but really no amount is too big. So support SEED, volunteer with SEED. It's an amazing resource that you guys have right here in Bandon. If you spend a lot of time out at the rocks or at other places along the coast, you can volunteer to monitor Tufted Puffins. We can get you set up to help us with that. We're looking for somebody that might be interested in going down to Whale's Head Rock a few times throughout the season to do some puffin counts. So, that's another way that you could possibly help. You can certainly network. You can help me make connections if you hear of opportunities where people might want to learn about Tufted Puffins. You can inform breweries that have the wrong puffin on their stomach. Share the love of Tufted Puffins. And then I put enjoy, I mean this sincerely. The tufted puffin is an absolutely beautiful seabird. Go out and enjoy it. Bring your friends. I mean, everyone needs more joy in the world right now. And seeing tufted puffins do that. They bring so much joy because again, nobody hates the puffin.
You don't mention donating like to the Audubon Society or to the Seabird Institute specifically?
I was promoting C. And we
Sure.
happily take money, but I also think that like supporting local is a great way to participate.
Is there a way to direct money to the Seabird Institute through the Audubon Society?
There is, you can actually donate to the Seabird Institute,
Okay,
specifically. There's a specific website for us.
okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
This is a question for anyone who would know, if you're going out to the local rocks here to look and observe at puffins, because when they come in, they go into a burrow, what, you have to see them fly in, or what's the best opportunity to actually see them?
I'll let Carol, well, I will say that puffins tend to do, there's a few things puffins do that are pretty common. So they'll do something called a flyby. I call it a flyby, where you'll see them in the air and they'll look like they're about to touch down, but they don't really touch down. The thought is maybe they're trying to like confuse any predators so that nobody sees where exactly they are going. So if you see them in the air, you can sometimes follow them. It's not always easy to do that, I will say. Oftentimes they do what's called loafing. So they will just be not going right into the burrow. It's very odd to see a puffin fly directly into a burrow unless they have fish. So oftentimes they'll land on the rock and just loaf, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Okay.
That, for me, is the easiest time to see them. And then sometimes they'll be there and next second they're not. And then they'll show up again. And if they turn their head just the right way, sometimes they blend into the rock. They're obviously easiest to see when you get the tufts and the white face contrasting with the dark rock. But the easiest thing to do is to go out on the weekends when C is there and have the scope set up. And then you start to get the eye for it.
Yeah.
You will often see them at similar spots. So if you see one at a certain spot, below the nubbin next to the tuft, whatever the scripture it is. Yeah, that's actually an easy way to do it. Yeah, so I just want to end by saying that the researchers and the volunteers and the land managers, the nonprofits, all the people that are working are incredibly passionate and committed to trying to stop the decline. And again, the puffin it's really a poster child for seabirds, and it deserves to be, but it's kind of more of a sentinel species because if we are able to protect the tufted puffin, they're not the only bird that is having a hard time right now. But if we're able to protect the tufted puffin, we're going to be able to protect a lot of the other seabirds out there that might not rise to the status of, coolest bird ever. No bias there. So, with that is all I have to share with you today. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it known how the populations of murres, cormorants are doing? Are they declining also?
I actually don't. MERS, I think, are doing fairly well. I think they're seeing slight decrease, but overall, I think they're doing fairly well. And cormorants, I don't know. Does anybody know cormorants? The status of their population? I'm not sure.
Increasing.
I
They're more this year than last year.
I feel like they did tank and now they're making a comeback. But I don't have specifics on that.
Since there's a healthy population in the Aleutian Islands, has it ever been suggested to bring some of those non-fledged chicks down to face rock?
It's interesting that you bring that up. It has been talked about. We're not, again, sure. We want to make sure that genetically, like we don't necessarily want to bring another species down here if there is a genetic distinction between the species. The other thing we want to do is make sure that the habitat is appropriate for those birds. We want to make sure that they have the food source, that they're able to burrow, that the conditions are right for them to thrive. So we want to bring them down in what's called a sink, meaning that we bring them down, but they have no chance to thrive. Thank you. But yeah, it'd be cool if we could do that.
Now, we've seen puffins fly directly in the burrow, being chased by a peregrine.
Yes, the peregrine falcon. They are another one of, the tufted puffin predators. Yeah, that's pretty cool that you saw that though.
Question, when they lose their feathers at sea, how long does it take for them to grow them back?
It's about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah. About 2 weeks.
It's amazing to me that they can even fly with their little fat bellies.
I know, but they're not fat, they're
No,
stuffed.
Stop.
Well, what's being done to try and get the difference or find the difference genetically between them?
There's the question was what's being done to see if there's a genetic difference among the species. There's a researcher in Canada who is collecting samples right now. And by that, I mean, samples from shells, samples from feathers, and running the genetic tests to see. The initial results show that there is a slight genetic difference between those up in Alaska and here in the South, but we need more samples and we just don't have a lot of samples here because we don't have a lot of birds and they're not easy to get to. We can't easily reach into a burrow and grab a tufted puffin eggshell after it's hatched. Be cool, we could though. But yeah, that's it. That's an interesting study that's ongoing. So I'll be curious to see what happens there.
When you get the fledglings and bring them to other places, how come you can't tag them then to find out, where they go after that?
Well, so the Atlantic puffins, which is what I was talking about from Newfoundland, those are tagged. Almost every Atlantic puffin you see will have the kind of the bands on the legs. So that is a great time to actually tag them. We have not done that here on the Pacific Coast. Yeah.
Can I just say that it would be impossible for, let's say, a scientist to go up to the top and do that,
Yes.
face rock, and it would, just not work.
No. And it's the same with Haystack Rock and Cannon Beach.
Yeah.
We would do more harm than good
Yes.
in that process. So, it's, everyone's like, how come you just can't tag them? Like, they don't really want to be tagged. They're not offering to be tagged. It's not, it sounds really easy and conceptually it is, but in practice, it's not easy to tag puffins. Especially when we don't have that many remaining. Wire stickers, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. Enjoy.